Hello, and it's time to hunker in the bunker. And much as I would love to record the whole of today's A to Z on property number 11 in that masky thing, because I'm sure it's going to be much safer. It wouldn't be very efficient. Andrew is currently hunkered down in his bunker. I'm hunkered down in mine. We haven't yet managed to connect the piece of string between the two baked bean cans that we've got in order to communicate. So it's just me this time, and Andrew and I will be doing this together next week again as usual, but from our undisclosed locations with a split going right down the middle of the screen. So we've reached the letter E. And the first E that we've got here is efficiency. And as I mentioned just at the beginning, it wouldn't be very efficient to sit here doing this video with that kind of mask on. So there's always a balance between safety, efficiency, and a lot of factors in getting our business done. But you can make small hacks. You can make big changes to your business that make it work better. And I'm not suggesting that you work 74 hours a day with the time you've freed up. Have that as me time, but get the jobs for the day done in a smaller space of time. For example, let's look at, emails. Very often people will open the emails in the morning, they'll be disturbed by them all day long, then they'll open them again at lunchtime and have another think about them, and sort of mid-afternoon they'll reply to them. No. As the emails come in, put them into a folder or get your PA to do that if you've got one, and immediately categorize them between the things that need action and the things that don't. Some might just need an acknowledgement, and the action ones, try to action, say, the most important 5 or 6 in the day, and the others will just kind of disappear really under the sort of compost heap of email miss. And in terms of, for example, if you're running a site, we want that to be efficient as well. So we would have a Gantt chart if we're doing a refurb or a build, which would show us at any point in time with these sort of horizontal lines that appear and you could do them in Excel as well on a spreadsheet, where we're supposed to be in each stage of the project, and which bits of the project are dependent on the next bit. Like, for example, you can't finish off all the plastering before the cables have been laid in the walls, and so on, and this kind of thing. And when that all goes awry, then you lose a lot of time, and time, as everybody knows, is money. Now, E for equities is the next one on the list, and very often you'll see, particularly in that publication Money Week, but other publications are available, graphs to show how equities and property more or less kind of got step by step as time goes by and they increase in value. But what those guys forget, probably because they're in the business of recommending equities and this kind of thing, they forget that in order to buy property, you can put down 25% of the cost of the property. The bank or other lender will lend you 75% of it. So what this means is that if you buy a property worth, say, 100, and if that property, well, your deposit would be 25, and if that property just goes up to 125, so it's only increased by 25%, your £25,000 stake in that property is suddenly 50,000. So due to the magic of gearing, you've doubled your money. Banks will not, I mean, they used to do that prior to the crash of 1929, but these days banks will not lend you money to buy equities. It's not considered to be a sound enough security. And so the property versus equities thing always, for me, comes down on the side of property. However, if you were to invest money in some house builders, if you were to buy shares in some of those guys, when the economy really takes off, you can expect those shares to shoot up. But similarly, when the economy tanks, one or two of those might go under, and that will never happen if you own your own property. So kind of that's one to sort of take with a pinch of salt, if you like, and to be aware of the downsides to equities just as much as the upside. There's another E for equity word, and that is equity release. This normally happens to people of a certain age, say pensioners or whatever, who will look to free up a little bit of money from a property that they own, which by that age they've presumably paid off the mortgage, and the interest payments are rolled up, and they're really payable when that person dies, and not before. And so you can live in your own home and you've got an extra 100 grand or whatever to spend. So the advantages of that are you might be on a very, very small income, a very, very small pension or something like this, and it allows you to do that on round the world cruise that you always wanted to or whatever, although that's not such a good idea at the moment. Or to do whatever else rocks your boat. That's the good point. The bad point is if and you can move home with a lot of these products. It's worth checking before you sign on the dotted line, and they will just take some equity in the new home. But one issue we've got here is if you were hoping to leave some money to your children, for example, then the interest roll up will be quite big. You could borrow 100 and end up having to pay back 250 or something. So in terms of inheritance planning, equity release isn't kind of high on the list. Of course, you could yourself, as a lender, subject to regulation, of course, and I would imagine there'd be a load of regulation here. I haven't got Andrew to clue me in on the technicalities here. Perhaps you would grant an equity loan to somebody yourself as the lender. Big risk to you. There was a case, because this kind of strategy was quite popular recently in France, for example, and there was a case where the old lady living in the house actually outlived the person who'd lent the money. So there are downsides to this kind of thing just as much as the upsides. Estate agent. Now that's a great thing. Your estate agent in the game is actually your best friend. But first of all, you need to establish some credibility. So if you walk through the doors of the estate agent and say, "Hey, have you got anything BMV?" then they will show you the exit quite quickly, because it's quite clear you've been on some kind of course and learned some kind of mantra and got some unrealistic expectations of what can and can't be achieved. So over a period of time, build a relationship. Go in there, take a coffee for them, find out the go-to people to talk to, and really there are two people you need to talk to in the in your typical agent. There's the guy in the shiny shoes and the sort of slick back hair with lots of gel on it. He'll be early 30s or late 20s or something, and he's the mover and shaker, the ducker and diver, and he's the guy who gets out there on the street and finds the deals. So he's got a drawer full of these things. He wants to shift them quickly, and if you can help in that respect, he's your guy. The other person to talk to in the agency is either the owner, if it's a small independently owned agency, and they're usually the best ones because they're kind of quite hungry. They don't have PowerPoint presentations every Monday morning. They don't have lots of spreadsheets to tick about the number of viewings they've had or whatever. They want to sell, 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 and they don't get distracted by shareholders or anything like this. So either the office manager or else the owner, preferably the owner, develop a very good relationship with them, and then they will ensure that the ducker and diver, as I call them, will focus their attention on something they're going to give to you. Because these guys who are kind of doing the deals tend to have a very short attention span, and really you're only in the frame for as long as you're actually sitting right there in front of them. So the head honcho will sort of pull you in that respect. There are the other people in the office will be doing admin, or they won't be very good at sales, or they'll maybe just be starting, or possibly be sort of a retiree. And but if you walk into the estate agent office, what I often do, if it's a new one, is I'll stand outside and I'll look through the window, not at the adverts in the window, because most of them sold ages ago, but just sort of in the cracks between, to try and ascertain who's who in the office, so you can go straight for the main people when you enter the door. What do you do if the office junior approaches you beaming and says, "Hello, I'm Harry, can I help you?" and he's 12 years old? You honestly don't want to speak to Harry. No disrespect to anybody who's called Harold here. So the thing you do is you sort of cast a sort of surreptitious glance down at the kind of wide boy's desk at the front, and even if you've never met this guy before, you say, "Well, look, I'm here to speak to John," and that focuses it, and then it'll turn out that he's out of the office at the moment, and you end up speaking to the manager or whatever. It's very important to speak estate agent language. So, for example, to use that example I gave earlier, you wouldn't go, "I'm looking for something BMV." You'd go, "I'm looking for a property where there's some opportunity to add value and where there's a little skin in the game or whatever for me. at the end of the deal. Have you got anything suitable? Another tack that you can say with estate agents is you can ask them if there's anything that's fallen out of bed. What that means is something where, for example, we've got a long chain of properties where this little flat at the bottom selling for 35,000 or something leads to this flat selling for 1.2 million at the top, and some buyer somewhere in the middle has pulled out, and everybody's pulling their hair out. And when it's a transaction that has the sort of spread of the one that I just described, it may well be the case that the guy in the 1.4 million pound flat will just buy that little one at the bottom just to keep things moving. But certainly somewhere in the middle, they're unlikely to do so. So that's the kind of property where you can offer an offer that's kind of pretty much on the low side, with a good chance of getting accepted, because the estate agent is going to lose all that commission all the way up the chain if the whole chain collapses. So that's one quite good deal to sort of to do there. E is now for estate agent tricks. Obviously, 99.9% of estate agents are all lovely fellas. One or two of them might do a few sort of sharp practices. Bait and switch is one whereby either online or in the estate agent's window you'll see something that looks absolutely bargain of the century. And when you inquire about this, that was just gone, whereas it actually went in 2016 or something like this. But here's one. That's a bit on the naughty side. I had an estate agent once who didn't pass on an offer, as estate agents are obliged to do. And I was just in the property in question doing the final bits of staging, when suddenly there's a knock on the door from a very charming lady who wanted to buy, who said, I'm buying your house. And I said, well, there's some mistake, because it's a gentleman buying the house. And I said, no, it's absolutely me. So I had to go in and have some fairly strong words with the agent the following morning, and sure enough, he hadn't passed on the offer. Now, whether the person who'd made the original offer was his mate or whatever, I have no way of knowing. But eventually ended up being sold to that lady on my insistence, because she was terribly nice. I don't think it was a tomorrow's price thing. It was more of a not passing on the offer thing. As a little sort of incidental thing, her modus operandum for getting the deposits for these houses was that she would go on quiz shows on television, and she was pretty good at them, and she was winning the prizes. So effectively, by using gearing, she managed to sort of gear up from, I don't know, £20,000 worth of prize money from a TV show to buying a house. And I saw her later on a show that was called Going for Gold, so I know that she was legit and on the level, and that's what she did. The next thing, about is event management. And we'll just address this one very quickly. Again, at the moment, we're not running any events, but we can imagine that the time will come when events on stages are being hosted again, and when rooms are once again full of people. Although, again, we may be, due to the current lockdown situation, entering an absolute sea change in the way that many things in our lives are taking place. And it may be that after seeing how Zoom works, people will be reluctant, A, to speak at events, and B, to attend them, because about a week ago I was due to speak at an event in Wolverhampton, which cancelled, from a very good friend Sarge, so we decided to do it online. And all the attendees, 100 or so people, were sitting there watching it online. I was sitting right here in this very spot, delivering some content. Rather than that was an evening when I normally do a radio show. So rather than postpone my radio show, I was able to just swivel the chair around a bit at the end of the talk, which ended 5 minutes before the radio show was due to begin, and then I was able to start doing that. So is travelling around the country by car, by train, and all this kind of thing really necessary anymore? So I think we may be seeing a change in that. But if assuming that events do come back and become popular, then there is money to be made, A, from getting what we call the bums on the seats, from helping to facilitate getting these people to actually come along to the room, and then B, for actually staging the event for the event organizer. And this is something that very often will be outsourced, and there's opportunity there to make good money, particularly if these are regular events. But for one-off, obviously, the fee is much higher. So event staging similarly is similarly something that can be monetized. But both of those two strategies rather depend on the way things pan out. I suppose it depends on how long this lockdown goes on that we're currently experiencing at the time of recording this, and also whether during that time, and I think the longer it goes on, the more likely this is, whether people get used to this kind of situation, and then the new norm becomes sitting at home with cameras. I mean, I do like an element of personal contact. It is nice to get the sort of FaceTime where you're actually sitting opposite somebody having a coffee, but it may be a long time before we get back to that, and so that is something we realistically have to face as a prospect right now. But by sitting here in the bunker, and it's quite a luxurious bunker, as you can see looking behind me, I've got lots to read, we are saving quite literally millions of lives. I saw some figures last night that up to 40 million people might die if we all go around spreading this thing, and 95, this is worldwide, 95% of those deaths can be avoided by doing what we're doing now, and it's really no biggie. So it's a small contribution that we're making. We're saving our own grandparents and parents as well as other people's, so there's every reason to do this. EDC, exchange with delayed completion. So why might we want to do that? Well, one very, there are many reasons. The principal one being that at the point of exchange you haven't got the funds. But another reason could be that at the point of exchange the property is unmortgageable. So then it would be much harder to get the funds. You'd have to use bridging finance, and the whole thing would get a lot more costly, if not more complicated. Not necessarily more complicated, because there are bridge-to-let products now where you start on a bridging loan and then switch to a standard buy-to-let offered by the same lender at a much better rate once the property is serviceable. But back in the day, it's less common now, but you can still push for it. Solicitors sort of push back a bit sometimes. What you could do is, when you found a house that was very often a probate, but not always, in an appalling condition, then you could pay a deposit, preferably as low as possible, probably talking about 5%, and get the keys from the owner. And then if the reason that property was unmortgageable, for example, was because it didn't have a serviceable kitchen and or bathroom, well, it wouldn't take very long to put those in. And at the same time, you might do a bit of cosmetic refurb and so forth. And then you can get to a point, and with the full agreement and knowledge of lenders, where just before the completion, the valuer comes in, sticks a value on that, and you get your funds. And that's a great strategy that can really work. And you know, everybody wins, because the seller had something that was unmortgageable, so he was going to get a kind of cash price. You're still getting a bargain because you're not paying full market, if you like, for it because of the works that you've had to do. That's factored into the price. But clearly the works that you have to do cost much less than the reduction that you're going to get, and you're going to get a mortgageable property nonetheless, which is going to stack for you. So I'm a great believer in win-win situations, and I think that is one such. So if you can persuade the other side, the vendor in the first instance, and more importantly the vendor's solicitor, to go along with something like this, then exchange with delayed completion is something that can work for you. And sometimes the delay is only, say, an extra 4 weeks, so that you get 8 weeks between exchange and completion rather than the usual 4. But that 8 weeks is long enough to do a full refurb, to be honest. So you could get quite a lot of works done during that time, and it's something that could work, as I say, for both parties in the game. The final one that I'm going to talk about very briefly tonight is a former show home. When a builder is finishing off a development, one of the last, if not the last, property to go will be the show home. So he is, or she, by then is concentrating on a completely different area. Their mind is distracted. It might be coming up to the end of their tax year, that for many reasons they want to shift to the show home quickly. So you might get the staging furniture free. You might get a significant reduction on the price, provided that you can move quickly And the show home is often best located. It's often in the best possible location for the development, because that's the one that's right near the front, and that's the one that might be detached where all the others are semis and so forth. So there are bargains to be had. So go out there and do those deals. Now, as I say, fingers crossed, I will be back with my very good friend Andrew in our usual slot next week. I hope you haven't minded me wittering on too much this time, but do stay safe, take good care of yourselves, do wash those hands copiously. We'll be doing that for at least a year. It's so important. It could save your life. I mean, I didn't know what soap was a week or two back, and now it's my new best friend. So absolutely, absolutely do that. Stay safe, and see you next week.